What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we have got our week 6 waiver wire pickups, all the names you need to know, so make sure to tune in. And as always, if you guys enjoy it, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Join our free newsletter for exclusive content. Become a VIP to get personalized fantasy advice from yours truly for the rest of the fantasy season. And give us a follow on Twitter at alldaypigskin to continue interacting with us as the week progresses. But in the meantime, let's get right into it. Before getting into our breakdown, we want to give you guys a quick word from our sponsors at Overlay Fantasy Sports, who we've actually been using since the start of the NFL season, specifically their matchup shop function, which is absolutely awesome. And let's face it, betting on the same old Team A versus Team B game can get a little bit boring. Well, that's where the matchup shop function comes into play, as it allows you to bet on individual player matchups. All you have to do is put your bet in terms of who you think will have a higher fantasy performance. And it's incredibly simple as well. Just like a normal bet would work, you've got your different spreads, anywhere from Thursday night football to Sunday's games, or even Monday night football. You can have a number of different possibilities and choices. You will find a bet that you love, whether it's two running backs versus each other, two quarterbacks, two wide receivers. Honestly, it's all there. And if you guys want to even get a couple different bets going, Overlay Fantasy allows you to do that, as well as you can put single bets, but you can also get a couple of bets together on one matchup slip and get a big parlay going for a big time payout. And honestly, if the NFL isn't your thing, have no fear. Overlay Fantasy has got other options like golf, MLB, and the NBA. So make sure to check it out and have all that homework you're doing not only benefit your fantasy squad, but your wallet as well. As always, we start with the quarterback position, and the first name to know here is Andy Dalton of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, obviously, the reason Dalton finds his name here is because of the Dak Prescott injury, season ender, unfortunately. But that means now this is Andy Dalton's team moving forward. And Dalton is still a very viable starting quarterback. And to some extent, the Cowboys get lucky that their season isn't over and that their offense can continue to do some damage, and especially in positive matchups, as is the case in Week 6 versus the Arizona Cardinals, a defense that shouldn't scare you really at all. And yes, the ceiling for this offense isn't quite what it was when Dak Prescott was under center, obviously, but the weapons haven't changed here, folks. You've still got Cooper, you've still got Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, you've got a viable tight end, a great running back. What I'm trying to say is Andy Dalton, going forward, could be a weekly starting quarterback, so get him while you can. Next up, we've got Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, who this last week versus Seattle had 249 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Nothing too crazy, too eye-popping, but in Week 6, he will face the Atlanta Falcons defense, and even with the Falcons making some head coaching changes, that doesn't change the fact that their defense is struggling, that it is dealing with injuries, and that Kirk Cousins should be able to take advantage of this matchup. I think that he is a great streamer for Week 6, probably a high-end quarterback too, with anywhere between 250 to 300 passing yards, 2 to 3 touchdowns. Next, we've got Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans, who has yet to play this week, but in Week 6, he's got a decent matchup versus the Houston Texans. And we just saw Gardner Minshew have a pretty successful outing versus the Texans defense. So Ryan Tannehill can definitely do something similar. And the reason we're a little bit more optimistic about Tannehill in Week 6 compared to Week 5 is that slowly we should see some of those offensive weapons hopefully return for the Titans, returning from that COVID IR designation. And if that is the case, then Tannehill, not a bad flyer. Our fourth and final quarterback is Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Miami Dolphins, who absolutely blew up in a classic Fitzmagic game versus the 49ers. 350 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. And usually the way it works is when someone recommends Ryan Fitzpatrick, usually the week right after, he kind of has a below average game. But week 6 features a matchup versus the New York Jets, and I just don't see the Dolphins and Fitzpatrick all of a sudden disappearing versus this Jets team that's an absolute mess. I would fire up Ryan Fitzpatrick as a low-end quarterback 1 in week 6. Moving on to our running backs, we start with J.D. McKissic of the Washington football team. And honestly, it's a bit of a wasteland at the running back position in waivers. And we should predicate this by saying McKissic is more so a PPR ad only because not really contributing anything as a rusher. But in terms of pass catching, 6 receptions for 46 yards. Could be a flyer in terms of a flex play for you guys in week 6. The matchup versus the Giants defense also not that bad. So keep McKissic in mind in terms of a PPR flyer. The second and final running back on this list is Chase Edmonds of the Arizona Cardinals, and it's probably a long shot to even mention Edmonds because he is a popular handcuff to Kenyon Drake, who has been struggling, pretty much since the start of the season. But he's probably going to be more widely available than a guy like an Alexander Mattison, who we could have included after Dalvin Cook got banged up, groin injury. So we focus on Edmonds instead, who will be facing that Dallas Cowboys defense that just gave up a pretty decent outing to Devonta Freeman. Now, yes, Edmonds probably won't see as high usage as Freeman, but he still had 3 rushes for 36 yards and a touchdown this last week versus the Jets, but also just as impressive, 5 receptions for 56 yards. We think that this will be a high-scoring affair, and if Kenyon Drake continues to trend down, Chase Edmonds will continue to close that gap and could end up being a viable flex play week in and week out. Before continuing, I want to tell you guys a little bit about a new partner of ours in Thrive Fantasy, which is an absolutely awesome daily fantasy sports app that specializes in player props. And the great thing about Thrive Fantasy is that it's super simple to use, as they've eliminated the need to do countless hours of research because they only ask you about the top tier athletes in a respective sport. Literally, all you have to do is find a contest and join it. From there, just select the props you like and rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. And it's not just the NFL. There's NBA, MLB, PGA. Literally, you think it, Thrive Fantasy has it. In fact, Thrive has awarded over $1.5 million in prizes since launching in 2018 and has $50,000 guaranteed in prizes weekly. So sign up today, and when you use promo code ALLDAY on sign up, you receive an instant match bonus up to $50. You can download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store, Play Store, or by visiting their website, thrivefantasy.com. So stop waiting, sign up today, use promo code ALLDAY, and start propping up today. Moving on to our wide receivers, this is where you guys will have a lot of options this week, and we start with none other than Chase Claypool of the Pittsburgh Steelers, the breakout rookie star of week 5. Definitely took advantage of Deontay Johnson's absence, and in that time, he had 4 total touchdowns, but specifically 7 receptions, 110 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns, and then that 1 rushing touchdown as well. He was the guy for Big Ben, and now in week 6, the Steelers will be facing the Cleveland Browns. It could potentially be a high-scoring affair yet again, and depending on the injury to Deontay Johnson, and if he misses any time, Claypool could be a high-end wide receiver too. Again, this very much so depends on the status of Deontay Johnson, but Chase Claypool is definitely looking like that next great rookie wide receiver that the Steelers hit on in the NFL draft. Next, we've got Travis Fulgham of the Philadelphia Eagles, who, along with Chase Claypool, was the other breakout star in the Philly-Pittsburgh game. 10 receptions, 152 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. But we should say, in terms of those 2 wide receivers, comparing them to each other, we have much more confidence in Claypool having some type of long-term success this season than Fulgham, just because we know with the Eagles, Potentially they can get guys like Alshon Jeffrey back, Deshaun Jackson back, Goddard, Zach Ertz will probably improve, won't struggle as much as he did last week. So for all those reasons, we think that Fulgham, yes, he had a great game, but if you guys are trying to rely on him week in and week out, you'll probably be disappointed. So if you can somehow pick him up and then flip him for decent value in return, that might be your best option. Next up, we've got Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans, who maybe some people lost faith in, lost patience, and finally just cut him after a slow start to the season. And wouldn't you know it, that's when he blows up 8 receptions, 161 yards, and a touchdown. Now, for what it's worth, we did say just maybe one more week of patience, especially after the Texans moved on from Bill O'Brien, and that could have a positive impact on the usage of Brandin Cooks. And obviously, he blows up. Now, we're not saying that's the new normal and that he'll be the clear-cut number one wide receiver for the Texans, but it seems like that target share is now more in his favor and that his upside is definitely trending in the right direction. A matchup versus the Tennessee Titans in week 6 also isn't that bad, and we think that Brandin Cooks, an experienced wide receiver, won't be as inconsistent, and some of the rookie wide receivers that people will be targeting could be a decent sleeper if someone went ahead and dropped him previously. Continuing on, we've got Christian Kirk of the Arizona Cardinals, who this last week had 5 receptions for 78 yards versus the New York Jets. And in week 6, he gets the Dallas Cowboys defense. And in case you hadn't figured it out, we like the Arizona offense this week. We mentioned Chase Edmonds. We'll also mention Christian Kirk, who these last 2 weeks has had pretty solid outings. Now, obviously, Hopkins is still the number one option, but Kirk could get it going versus this lonely Dallas defense if you guys need a flyer. Our final wide receiver is T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he's probably the biggest long shot to be available as he's been producing fairly consistently for a couple of weeks now. But if he's still available, we'd honestly probably prioritize him out of all the other wide receivers we've mentioned, because the Cincinnati Bengals will potentially be without AJ Green after he injured his hamstring. Obviously, we don't know the severity of it, but with his injury history, it wouldn't shock us to see the Bengals be a little bit safe in that regard. And honestly, Higgins was trending as potentially that number 2 wide receiver for the Bengals anyway. A matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, not ideal, but look, last week, 4 receptions, 62 yards. We think he can do something similar in week 6. Looking at our tight ends, unfortunately, another short list here. Only one name, Cameron Brate, that we would be looking at of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last week versus the Bears, 5 receptions, 44 yards, and gets a much better matchup versus the Green Bay Packers in week 6. This should be a higher scoring affair. Obviously, O.J. Howard no longer available, done for the year with the Achilles. Gronk being used more so as a blocker. And if Chris Godwin misses yet another week with his hamstring situation, then we think Cameron Brate could be a very good plug-and-play guy for week 6. And finally, we look at our defenses, where we begin with the Washington football team. And yes, Washington has struggled these last few weeks, but guess what? They are facing the New York Giants in week 6. And the way that Daniel Jones has turned the ball over, we think that Washington will have a lot of good opportunities to take the ball away, to get after Daniel Jones. The Giants have really struggled scoring touchdowns in general as well. We like the upside of Washington in week 6. Next, we have got the New England Patriots, who had their week 5 game postponed. But if things trend in the right direction and they do play in week 6, it will be a game versus the Denver Broncos. And especially if Cam Newton returns in that game and brings some stability to that overall team, then we really like the Patriots defense versus a banged up Denver offense. So for that reason, keep your eye out for this game. The Patriots defense could be a solid play. Our third and final defense is that of the Miami Dolphins. And look, this is definitely a dart throw, but we've said it before, we'll continue to say it. Anytime you are playing the New York Jets, defensively, you are worth a look in terms of fantasy football, and that's exactly what's happening here. The Miami Dolphins had a decent outing versus the 49ers and Jimmy Garoppolo. We think they can do something similar to the New York Jets and potentially Joe Flacco again. So we'd take a chance on the Miami Dolphins defense, as crazy as that sounds, in week 6. So with that, we wrap up our week 6 waiver wire targets. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them. And if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, check us out on Twitter, All Day Pigskin. Give us a follow to continue interacting with us as the week progresses. And online at alldaypigskin.com. Join our free newsletter for exclusive content. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.